Joining us now in studio is our very own 4th District Congressman Ron Estes. Congressman, thank you for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show and have you back in studio. It's always nice.
Good evening. It's great to be back.
Let me start with House Bill 2. This is the immigration bill that that was just passed. It's I would address immigration. It's the most sweeping immigration bill. It's been passing quite some time. Passed on Thursday, the same day Title 42 was lifted. The measure passed in a 219 to 213 vote with 2 Republicans, John Duarte of California and Thomas Massie of Kentucky, joining all the Democrats in opposing the measure. Ron, if you look at this, the crisis of the border, obviously it's gotten worse since the Title 42 was done away with. But do your colleagues across the aisle just not want to fix this? Is that, basically they like the issue more than they want to fix it?
That's almost what you can't have any other explanation. the Biden administration has done everything they can to break the security of the border. And that's what HR 2, the Secure the Border Act, was designed to address. President Biden's gone out, and in everything that President Trump did, he stopped doing. Whether it was having folks stay in Mexico, whether it was building a wall, which makes sense in some areas. You're across the border from San Diego and Tijuana. Yeah, a wall makes the most sense.
Yeah, you'd think.
It's not magical to stop people, but what we wanted to do is let's put some common sense legislation back in place. And so HR 2, the Secure the Border Act, is designed to start back up building a wall, which President Biden has stopped. Even the material that was sitting on the ground, he didn't refuse.
Yeah, it's just sitting there rusting,
yes,
right? You've been on the show and
That's
told
right.
us about. You've seen the piles of the stuff.
Yep. And it's not just a wall. It's a high tech device that's being designed to that. So fiber optic cable is running through it. They have sensors to test for tunneling underneath the wall. They also have cameras and heat sensors to actually monitor other activities. Actually, looking at other things included in the bill is, how do we use all this smart technology? How do we hire more Border Patrol agents, which we funded through this piece of legislation?
Which is something Biden and the Democrats have been calling for.
That's right. Well, they called for it in this next round of budget. They called for more money. They didn't necessarily commit that they were going to hire more agents. But then when somebody says, well, what are you going to do with the money? Well, you can't question us on that.
Okay, they want more money, but
because you're not
specifics.
wanting more agents. So, so what they've done is they've funneled the money away from actually securing the border, and they're making all the agents, actually handhold and process all these people that have come across the border.
Right. Instead of doing their job.
Instead of doing their job, which is to secure the border. And that's what something like the Remain in Mexico policy was so good, because what people do, and this is driven by the cartels who control the Mexican side of the border, who get thousands of dollars off of everybody that crosses a border. So what the cartels will do is they'll tell people to come across. Okay, they go and advertise in countries like Romania and Hungary and in African countries. They're people from 160 countries that have crossed the border in the last year. So it's not like it's from Central America people that are coming up, or from Mexico that are coming across. So what the cartels do is they'll bring these people to the border. They'll send them across, say, just ask for asylum, because under the U.S. laws, then you have to process them. And so what they do is then the Border Patrol agents have to go. So they come across the border and just stop, hold their hands up, say, we're here, we want asylum. And as part of that also, then the Border Patrol agents have to go take care of them. They have to bring diapers for the kids.
Right.
All the other issues you have to do.
I saw video just this week of border agents who should be working the border instead passing out granola bars and water.
That's right.
And doing paperwork.
That's right. And the other piece, then the cartels will say, okay, the Border Patrol agents in this sector are busy processing those 20 people we just sent across. Let's sneak our gang members over here 5 miles away, or let's smuggle our drugs across, or let's smuggle the sex trafficking folks that we want to get across over here. And so what we're seeing is all these dangerous gang members and terrorists come across. Last month alone, there were 11 terrorists on the terrorist watch list.
Yeah, didn't we just this week get a guy from Afghanistan who was on the terror watch? They happened to catch him, fortunately, but still.
And there's actually one of those people coming in last month were a double dipper. They'd come through the month before, were caught, sent back, and were already coming back through the border again. Same thing, fentanyl. We have tens of thousands of pounds of fentanyl that are crossing the border since President Biden's taken office. And what that equates to is we have roughly 290 people a day dying from fentanyl overdoses. That's equivalent of a large airplane. And if a large airplane crashed every day, the President of the United States would do something about it. Instead, they're allowing this smuggling to happen, and they're not stopping it.
But Congressman, Secretary Mayorkas says that the border is closed.
And he does not have operational control of the border. If you talk to the Border Patrol agents, they'll tell you that. I mean, even up into the management ranks will tell you that at the risk of their jobs and the conversations that you have to have. And it is a shame that the president's not securing the borders, not protecting the country the way that is supposed to do. And in fact, they're not even caring for the people that come across. So you come across, they give them an asylum date because they asked for asylum.
Yep.
They're out 5 and 6 years into the future.
Where they on their honor.
On their honor, and they just send them across into the country. They basically a catch and release program. Stop you at the border, set you a date, show up, and then
we trust you.
Go live your life for 5 years. And in the meantime, the New York Times ran a story in the last week. They have lost 85,000 unaccompanied minors that they were supposed to be watching for. They've just disappeared into the country somewhere, which is what the gangs are doing with the sex trafficking for the human beings that they're smuggling across the border. It's a shame the way they're treating human beings and not protecting the country as part of that process.
And we're the ones that get called inhumane because we want to secure the border.
It really is. The numbers, I haven't seen a recent number, but the last numbers I saw were over a third of the people, over the third of the women and teenage girls who came across the border had been sexually molested on the way. That's even before they got here.
We'll take a quick break, and then if you can stick around, I want to talk about the budget because if you listen to the press, it's as early as June 1st. And I know that the Speaker McCarthy has been talking with Joe. Whether or not the president is aware they've been talking is a whole other issue. But we'll take a quick break, and then we'll return with Congressman Ron Estes. You're listening to the John Whitmer Show on 98.7 and 1330 KNSS, Wichita's #1 talk. With us still is our very own 4th District Congressman Ron Estes. So, going on now 2 weeks ago, Ron, House Republicans passed a bill to raise the debt ceiling while cutting spending by nearly 14% over a decade. President Biden has vowed to veto the measure. The Senate, Schumer he says he won't even take it up. Much like the border bill, it seems like Republicans are passing bills to at least try and solve these issues, and Democrats are on the side of doing nothing.
Yeah, that really is probably a good description. Is that we know there's problems that have to be solved, and we're focusing on that. We're trying to get legislation passed out of the House, which we can as a majority of Republicans. But President Biden and Senator Schumer are wanting to play politics, and they're not stepping up. I mean, they've been saying now, what was it? It was almost 100 days that Biden said, "I'm going to meet again with Kevin McCarthy." Never did a thing. Finally, they met and started the process. I mean, once we passed a piece of legislation that said, let's raise the debt ceiling, but as part of that, let's also start to get some control in our spending, because our big problem is overspending. This fiscal year, 1 out of every $5 that we spend at the federal government is borrowed. Think about that. 1 out of every $5. That's like somebody making $48,000 a year is spending $63,000 a year.
Right, yeah, it's unsustainable.
And they already have $31,000 on their credit card, and they're asking for another credit card to add another $2,000 onto that. I mean, so we've got to address this. It's a problem that's been built up over a long period of time. We're not going to solve it in 1 year. We know it's going to take time, but when we pass our debt ceiling bill, which actually addresses the budget and spending, we said, let's put in fiscal 2022 levels. I mean, what we were spending at a year ago.
Right.
And use that as the level of spending for next year. Because it was a good year 2 years ago. I mean, we were coming out of COVID, and things were moving
reasonable.
Forward. Yeah.
And not much has changed.
Yeah. And so that would create a new baseline. I mean, the Democrats have been out talking about the sky is falling because of this, and literally it was what we were spending a year ago. And so what we wanted to do is, and the Congressional Budget Office said that if we take this approach that we had passed, that we will cut $4.8 trillion out of the next 10 years, which is so important because when I came to Congress 6 years ago, it was about a $6 trillion gap. For a 10-year period, if we could figure out how to save $6 trillion, we could have a balanced budget in 10 years. Now that's up to almost $16 trillion in the 6 years that I've been there, just because of all this additional spending that's being put in place and the higher trajectory that's being added to it. President Biden's budget that he proposed just now was going to add another $17 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years.
And that's not, I mean, we had to incur some of that with COVID. There was just no way, but now you don't. I mean, now all the spending now is just wish list stuff. And that's what I don't understand, is they don't understand we can't afford it. It's not sustainable. You know, and I watched the press coverage of that meeting between McCarthy and Biden. And, you know, just from a layperson's perspective, McCarthy at least was able to go in there and say, look, we did something. There are a lot of your caucus, a lot of your colleagues that had never voted for a debt limit increase ever, and yet they did it.
Yep.
And here's Joe Biden saying, I will not negotiate, I will not budge, I will not take a step. So who's actually not moving here? Who's not working in middle? Who's not compromising? It's Joe Biden.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the Republicans in the House, and we have Republicans that are in districts that Republican majority by 25 percentage points.
Who probably told their guy not to vote for him.
Yes. And we have Republicans in the House that were elected in districts that President Biden won by 10 percentage points. So they're getting beat up. President Biden only wants a clean debt ceiling. And so there was a tough vote for a lot of our members. And yet we stood up. And the House Republicans stood up and did the right thing in terms of saying, let's move our spending forward, but at the same time, let's cut back on some of the overspending and start to get some of this under control and start that process. And President Biden and Senator Schumer need to step up and participate in this process and help make things better for the American people.
So you got, you know, depending on who you ask, Janet Yellen, you know, certain people who say anywhere between June 1st and a couple weeks later is the deadline before everything goes cattywampus. Who do you think blinks first?
Yeah, there's not a magic number. And the reason being is the revenue receipts come in at different cycles and the spending goes out at different cycles. Right. And, you know, actually, if we can make it to June 15th, that brings in some more revenue, which means there's another 2 or 3 weeks that could be added. Secretary Yellen's the person who makes the sole determination of that. I mean, she's already doing what she calls what they call extraordinary measures, but in reality, they're not doing some spending. They're not putting money into the retirement fund. They're not buying bonds for states that the states can use, and so they're already making some decisions about how much of that money gets spent. Secretary Yellen's the sole person to make that determination of how much money she has available to spend to pay the bills. And so I think what will happen is as we get closer and closer to June 1, we'll get more information about the revenue and the spending. I do think that's part of this negotiation. It will probably end up slipping a few days because that is driven by Secretary Yellen. But I think as part of that, we'll get to an agreement. It probably will be in June timeframe and make that process. And it's so important that let's keep the country moving forward, but let's also get this overspending under control as well.
So your guess is eventually Democrats will agree to some cuts. You don't think Republicans will get to a point where they pass a clean debt ceiling?
I think the only logical decision is you've got to cut some of the spending because that's what's driving it. I mean, if we don't do anything on the spending side, we're right back in the same boat.
Right.
The next time,
whenever 15 months,
however much money we add to that, because we're just adding one credit card on top of another,
right.
And at the end of the day, you've got to address the spending because that's the problem.
Yeah, as former President Trump said Thursday night, This is, if you don't do something about the spending, eventually you're going to default.
That's right. And default's not the right word in this scenario because we, like I said, we borrow 1 out of every $5 that is spent by the federal government, which means that 4 out of $5 we have available to spend.
Right. So stop spending the one.
It's not spending.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how do we spend the right amount? How do we get back so that we're spending is in line with our revenue?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. I wanted to. I saw something you tweeted, by the way. You've got both your personal and your office account, the Rep Ron Estes, at Rep Ron Estes. But something that Twitter account tweeted out this week, despite the president's bogus claims that, quote, inflation is down 40% since last summer, he was deceptively talking about the percentage change in rate of inflation. New inflation numbers show Kansans pay 15.3% more than January 2021 for goods and services. I was so glad to see you put that out there because, and I know we only have about a minute left, but I was so glad to see you put that out there because it is so true. Biden keeps saying the economy's great. People in Kansas aren't feeling it.
Yeah, I mean, President Biden's misrepresenting what the facts are, and what was happening was a year ago the year-over-year inflation rate was 9%. Now the year-over-year inflation rate's 5% more on top of that 9%.
Right.
So the real inflation rate since President Biden's been in office is 15.3%, which is cumulative, and it's hitting people and it's hurting people. I mean, that's the equivalent of 2 months' pay to buy the same amount of groceries, make the same car payments. You know,
that's crazy.
It's crazy to think through that.